Okay, so good evening, everyone. If I can just draw a little tiny bit of attention, if I may. So I'm Malcolm, I'm with the Data Lab. I'm one of the project managers and I work in our innovation team. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening and also the people who are online with us tonight. This is the first time I've run one of these, so ignore any mistakes because there will be a few, I'm sure. But yeah, tonight we're going to talk about data and AI in the net zero, clean energy and climate innovation space. One of my pet topics, I do love this area. A little bit, if I can start just on the community itself. So this event is one of multiples that we run. Data Lab community, we're now about 9,000 members, just under. It's AI professionals, it's data scientists, it's what I lovingly call data nerds, enthusiasts, people, members of the public, anybody with an interest in data. We run regular events, this being one of them. We run webinars. On the community, you'll find discussion groups. People post questions and, surprisingly, get intelligent answers. We have a mentorship scheme that runs. And again, that's not us forcing this. This runs automatically. It is a very self-motivated group in the community. You'll find like-minded peers. You can ask questions. You can gain support. And all the better, particularly for us Scots, it's free. If I can, just to tag you on here, if anybody is posting on socials, if you could just tag us on LinkedIn for this evening. So, coming on to this evening, we're going to run this in two 30-minute sessions, two individual speakers. I'm not normally one to sort of fret overly much about things like imposter syndrome, but I have to say I'm totally in awe of the two people we have this evening. We have Dr. Hannah Rudman, who's to my right, but to your left, I think, and Dr. Jassel, and I'm going to get her surname wrong because I've been practicing and getting it very badly wrong, Majevadia. Okay, sorry. So Jassel will introduce herself properly and correct me afterwards. I'm not going to dwell on their backgrounds and their CVs, but Hannah covered everything from theatre production, digital transformation, and now rewilding. I mean, it makes my CV look just flat. And Jassel, a sax jazz player, to science presenter, to fintech, and to techno-economic modelling, which my daughter was talking about at home, which is a weird thing to have with your 30-year-old daughter, but that's fine. So yeah, I guess probably not an awful lot more to say. There will be question and answer at the end of each session. So if you have things, if you can just retain them for those sessions, and we'll do Hannah's talk first, Jazz's talk second. Questions and answers at that stage. There should be time at the end, hopefully, for a little bit more of the Q&A. People online, again, if you could, post your questions and we'll pick those up. And I think probably without any further ado, I'll hand over to Hannah, who will take us through the first of her talks and what they're doing in rewilding in Scotland.
Thanks so much for the intro, Malcolm. All right, I need the clicker. Thank you. No, not that one. That one. So, everyone, let me take you on a journey. Come with me, a little bit west of here, a little bit north of here, to the Highlands. We're a nature restoration project developer. Here in Scotland, our overarching principles are to enable nature recovery and community prosperity through rewilding. We manage land, we conduct research, we work with those local to our estates to achieve community benefit. We engage directly with policy and market developments and advise other land managers. I'm going to talk today about the range of data that we gather on nature's state and on carbon sequestration. And I'll finish just briefly talking about how we're considering using AI tools to support that mission. So we manage 1,817 hectares of land at the moment in two sites in Scotland, the Barahormid site and the Bunnoit estate. We've got over 800 shareholders, a crowdfund enabled citizens like you and me to support at the £50 mark. But of course, we've got corporate shareholders and family office shareholders with much larger holdings. Those investors will need to see dividends at the end of a period of time, and we need to create profits to pay those. The business model that we do apply to achieve that is through selling credits, carbon credits and other nature-based credits as nature markets emerge. And all sectors, including the tech sector including the public sector, are on a transition pathway to net zero, and we hope to help them make that transition pathway nature positive. There are global treaties driving that. The Paris Agreement set the price for carbon in 2015. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework of 2022 suggested that nations put a price on biodiversity and deliver national strategies and action plans. So in the UK, we do have sector transition pathways that include that. And just to remind us about how carbon credits work, they're generated by projects that have avoided or removed greenhouse gas emissions. Sometimes they're technical projects, like renewable energy. And these are really great for avoidance credits, but nature-based projects are best for carbon removals or carbon sequestration because they don't create a new big carbon footprint at the point of project creation. So each credit represents 1 less tonne of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gas equivalents in the atmosphere. Now, most companies, yours included, is probably doing what it can to reduce its own carbon footprint so that they get to a position near net zero. They're probably trying to do it in-house or on site at the moment, but if they can't, then companies will need to buy in credits from external projects to offset that outstanding footprint. So our business model, it relies on sale of carbon credits to companies that need those credits. And hopefully they want additional biodiversity uplift and community regeneration in order to add extra value. So what is rewilding? And how do we achieve credits with rewilding? We define it as the restoration of natural processes that determine outcomes in increasingly complete ecosystems. So the ultimate goal of rewilding is to re-establish self-sustaining native ecosystems that have little human management. But we recognise that a range of practices and objectives increase naturalness, and often they do need human intervention. So I'm thinking about managing nature systems differently, and then perhaps thinking about sustainable forestry or regenerative agriculture practices. The precise outcomes are forward-looking, but we can't tell exactly what they'll be. We just want to create healthy ecosystems that can cope with the expected impacts of climate change. And then rewilding is all about supporting the communities where the work's happening, so thriving communities of rural places. We provide jobs, we provide benefits to local people. Okay, so back to the nature. This is the Bunloit estate. It's on the shore of Loch Ness. It sits above the town of Drumnadrochit. And key actions and interventions that we're taking here are baselining the natural capital, so measuring the natural assets and what they are. And that work was completed in 2021. We now undertake ongoing monitoring to see what the impact of our interventions are. And those interventions are peatland restoration, native woodland creation, and we need to implement measures to improve the condition of the existing kind of ancient woodland of oak and birch that we've got on the estate. We're doing forestry compartment thinning and transitioning some of those areas to continuous cover forestry, including broadleaf species. And we're reintroducing missing species. We've begun that with hairy wood ants into the current woodland. And then those community benefits, we're supporting 2 joint ventures, one focusing on mindfulness in nature, and another, a community market garden project down in Drumnadrochit. We also run regular volunteer opportunities, school learning programs, and again, jobs and internships. So we're using a range of monitoring techniques to do that baselining first, the baseline of biodiversity present, the baseline of the opportunity for carbon storage in those natural assets, the nature. And then we're tracking uplift over time, following the processes and actions that we put in place. Some of the monitoring techniques demand ecologists with boots on the ground and expertise in distinguishing species and counting. But satellite imagery, drones, Internet of Things and bioacoustic sensors, camera traps and eDNA also play their part in the data collection. Now today we're really privileged because we have my colleague Cathy Atkinson in the audience, and she's the data scientist, the lead chief data scientist at Highlands Rewilding. So technical questions to Cathy at the end, please. But it's not just the technical data that we collect. We also collect rich media, rich photos, videos, and interviews to tell the stories of what we're doing and why. So let's watch Highlands Rewilding's co-chief scientist, Dr Callum Brown, explain why and how we're restoring peatland at Bunloit.
In the 1980s, peat was drained for commercial forestry. Ditches and thirsty conifers dried it out, turning it from a carbon sink into a carbon source. Today, damaged peatlands cause up to 20% of Scotland's annual emissions. Here at Bunloit Estate, we've mapped peat that's up to 8 metres deep. That's thousands of years old. But it's been degraded, and it's releasing around 1,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide every year. Now, we're restoring it, starting by removing the plantations that damaged it.
What we're looking at is a peatland restoration operation. This is an area that has been surveyed for peat depth, and we've identified areas of up to 7-8 metres of peat depth in this area. It's been heavily drained while the planting was taking place in the late 80s. So what we want to do is the nice clean site, then re-wet this area, and then this whole area will become back into, naturally over years, will turn back into a bog habitat with pool systems and other. So it's completely different to what we see just now.
Peatlands cover just 3% of the Earth, but they store more carbon than all of the world's forests. Restoring them locks away carbon dioxide, brings back rare wildlife, and soaks up water like a sponge. Peat holds 10% of the planet's fresh water. In Scotland, 4/5 of our peatland is degraded, but when we restore it, we flip that from polluter to powerful carbon sink. This ancient bogland might just be our best natural ally in the fight against climate change.
Thank you, Stephen. So you saw some of the tools that the ecologists use, Callum's peat probe that probes down to measure the depth, which is really useful, but only if you know where to pop it in the earth in the first place to know where to look. So this satellite map is data of the Bunloit peatland, and it's on the right-hand side of your screen. I think this is an open street map. Yep, or ordnance survey. Open street map, I think. No, I'm not getting any feedback. Ask Cathy what it is, but it has the UK HAB definitions of the terrain overlaid. And then what that enables is to give us that good idea of where to think about looking for peat, for species to start with and begin that baselining. The map also gives us a kind of tool that we can hand over to government departments that might be willing to give us grants for peatland restoration, or to corporate clients that might be thinking about supporting that peatland restoration through buying our credits. This is another service that we've used. It's the Terra Motion images, which are gathered by Sentinel-1, and they're over a 5-year period, and they help us actively map peatland degradation, across the UK. And it does that by measuring the peat surface motion. And peat naturally, as Callum was describing, kind of breathes like lungs in a chest, and that's what it's measuring, that movement. If it's moving about, it's full of water. If it's still, it's dried and then is at risk of degradation from animals going across it, the wind blowing it away, and so on. So we want to make sure that we're restoring hydrological integrity back into the areas of peat that we've got. And here the map is showing the degraded areas. So those are ones which need our attention as soon as possible. Now, one of the things that we noticed whilst we were looking at these maps was that the data in them versus the ground truth knowledge of what's actually there in the field didn't always match. So the AI-generated maps weren't as transparently trustable as you'd perhaps hope. And last year and the year before, we spent some time testing the accuracy of AI-generated maps which have been derived from satellite and drone data against the ground truth data collected by ecologists. I'll share the URL of that project at the end of the presentation. So this map then added data which we provided to Scottish Government for a grant to restore the peat, the red hashed areas where that forest was on the bog, and the orange oblong is where we had to make a metalled access point to enable the heavy machinery to come and remove those trees. So that photo and video data really enabling us to prove to them that the work took place. We used the drone's photo records to show the comparison of when the forest was on the bog, the beginning, to what it looked like after its removal, the kind of middle of the restoration. They needed to know that to enable us to receive grants for some of that activity, which finally we're receiving this year, but also the Peatland Code, which is the organisation that gives the credits to projects, also needed to see this evidence. So important to gathering that data enables our business model. So the work of the company is nature restoration, but it's also to prove that we've done nature restoration, and we do that through the different data that we collect. Now, don't worry about reading this, but it's that just describing that process of actions and saying that we've backed up those actions and that we've got a set of trustable data. This is the carbon credits brochure that I'd love to give any of your businesses to take away if you think your organisation might be interested to buy them. The credits issued are through the schemes like the Peatland Code, and they're verified by third parties. And so it enables us to say, look, we've done these activities, we can prove that we've done them according to the rules of the scheme, and the scheme has sent a third party along to verify that. So the South Bunloit part of the project that we saw in the film, that's going to create 1,700 credits. You've seen the beginning of the restoration work, you've seen the middle of it where the trees are removed. Next, we'll be doing things like ditch blocking and managing drainage, and hopefully then we'll see the return of critical species like dragonflies, the northern emerald, sphagnum mosses and wading birds. So imagine those pictures of dragonflies in your corporate annual report after you've bought our amazing carbon credits. It's better than a picture of a server. We're also developing credits through woodland expansion and forestry. 34,000 native trees have been planted onto restock sites, so that was previously non-native conifer plantation. And the actions that we need to take to make sure that it looks like this picture, which is what we hope it might begin to look like as it grows, are the continuous removal of self-seeded Sitka and Western hemlock saplings. We don't want those. They're non-native species. And we also have to undertake deer control. One of the reasons that Scottish landscapes only have 4% of native natural woodland left and are pretty bereft of trees is because they're a favourite deer snack. So again, the drone photos show the before and after. The before of this one was that initial photo of the Bunloit estate with all the lovely yellow gorse on. This is now the after. That gorse is gone. Here are the trees, the new trees protected in mats on the ground and the tubes that then protect them. So again, if you're thinking of buying some lovely carbon credits, that new woodland will generate 8,400 and they're available for sale. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned that. As a science and data-driven organisation, we're also in the business of developing robust experiments, and those can often result in new academic and practical knowledge. So this is nighttime camera trap footage of an area where we're currently undertaking deer counts. We aim to keep deer numbers to targets set by the public bodies in the area. Okay, put your hand up if you spotted a deer. Oh, some of you did. Now, what camera traps are really great at is kind of showing species that just happen to be walking along and species that might not appear normally during the daytime. Now, in fact, red and roe deer are fairly happy about appearing in the daytime. They often hang about in herds and go around together eating all of the delicious saplings that we're trying to protect from them. So they're brazen, but what this video made us wonder was whether this was a Sika deer and whether actually we had more Sika deer on the estates than we thought. So another counting challenge for you. How many deer are on this photo? Jazz says 1. Malcolm says 1. I say 1. Kathy's going to have a different answer, but that's okay. This is that picture zoomed out. How many deer can you see here? I still think it's 1. It's our guy that we were zoned in on when we were close up there. Now, the thermal drone, have a look at what this did. So that's that same shot, our guy in the middle, and then look at what else we can see. The whiter the dots, the warmer the thing is. So we know that that's deer. We can deduce from the fact that they're not all in a herd and together and quite happy being spread out and hidden, that they're seeker deer, which prefer to do that. So how many deer can we see on this? Quick count, anyone?
14 I counted.
Oh, brilliant. Jazz counted 14. Yeah, I think it probably is a number like that. But what we did was think, okay, that's an interesting hypothesis. Maybe we've got far more seeker than we thought. So what about the lived experience of our estate staff? Could they say the same thing? So we got together with them and discussed how long it took them if they wanted to stalk a seeker deer, and they sort of said, well, actually, it takes us ages. It takes about 12 hours. It usually takes about 2 to stalk a red deer. So that combined experience enabled us to come up with some hypotheses about seeker deer traits. And we were able to test those with people working in the field. That then enabled us to create a journal paper, and that journal paper was taken up by not just scientists and practitioners, but the papers actually covered it because they felt it was rather cheeky of this seeker deer, which is non-native, to come and be trying to take over the Monarch of the Glen title. So much of the data that we're collecting is granular. It's year on year, and it's from on-the-ground collection backed up with these nature tech, these digital tools that are further triangulating the data. You saw from the video of the deer that it had the time, it had the date, it had the temperature. So that triangulation of data happening there. What else did I want to say? I wanted to say if you want to see any of those wonderful reports, look at the website. There are 4 natural capital reports which really detail all of the robust scientific experiments that we're undertaking and show the results of the data collection through time. And then finally, I just wanted to make a few comments about how we're using AI. Probably pre-last year, we used AI-derived mapping products and began to sort of recognize some of the problems with those. And that project that I talked about, Trustable AI in Mapping, is available to be explored at trustable-mapping.xyz. And we've used machine learning, and Kathy can talk to you all about this, to classify birds and bats from the audio data that we're collecting from the bioacoustic sensors. You know, all that lovely data coming from camera traps helps us tell brilliant stories to our shareholders and our stakeholders. This year, I think we're thinking about using large language models to help us with some of our everyday tasks, summarizing, researching, formatting, research and communications tasks. We applied to Google.org's Impact Challenge, the AI for Governments, with an idea to develop a digital twin using AI-driven machine learning tools. And that might be successful, and if so, come to Bunloit to see it as we roll it out there. We think that it could also be useful, agentic AI, as a junior code developer. Kathy needs way more colleagues, and this is the way we're thinking of creating them. Obviously, they would be fully overseen by the chief data scientist, Kathy, before getting any further than out of the computer. Sorry, I had a weird image in my mind there that didn't quite come out in the way that I said that, but it doesn't matter. So on the right are our usage principles. We're using everything behind closed walls at the moment and trying to think about how we use AI ethically. But I'm sure you've got questions and thoughts and comments, but that's what I wanted to say. So thank you very much for your attention.
place? Anybody here or online that has a question for Hannah, or any points they'd like to raise?
Hi, I'm Jeff Ballinger. I'm Chair of Butterfly Conservation in East of Scotland. I'm intrigued how you balance, you've obviously got, on your commercial side, you've got an imperative to make money, and that means maximum carbon credits. But as we know, ecosystems are complicated things, and there's this tension. Now, I've seen a lot of good things in your presentation about native woodland, etc. Do you want to comment a bit on how you see that balance within what you're doing?
I think we're lucky in the UK in that the schemes which kind of register the credits and put them onto the registries are run by organisations that we work with. So the Woodland Carbon Code is looked after by Scottish Forestry, and we often have discussions with them about what the rules of the schemes are. And in fact, we're going into a pilot with them over the summer because they're thinking that their carbon credits could be benefited by having biodiversity stacked into them. So we're going to help them think about what rules should be in place and what data should be collected to enable that. It's certainly a tension, though. Our scientists always want to do the maximum number of interventions and experiments. The minimum that we need to do is for the rules of the scheme, but of course we're doing lots more because we believe in the benefits to the biodiversity and ecology sector of finding out more about what interventions work.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Very good presentation. I was wondering for the audio, because you mentioned you put everything on S3 and then you run your classification. Have you considered kind of doing classification on the edge or some sort of feature extraction on the edge and not storing raw audio so much?
Kathy, would you answer that?
So one of the problems... So one of the issues we have is that we want to show change over time. So we want to be able to take what we're collecting now in terms of data and then see how that compares to 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. So models are changing all the time in terms of classifiers and things like that. So what we're doing at the moment is making sure we get the data and store that data as sound files that we can then process through the new models in 5 years' time or backward compatibility. So yes, we're getting the data and we're classifying it now and looking at it with the current models, but making sure we've got that raw data and that's stored there for that comparison over a longer period of time is really, really kind of the key thing for us.
That's over the turbine network, or how do you send the audio?
No, so the acoustic centre has an SD card. And so we put them out, and then a month later we get the sensors in, take the SD card, and then download the data from that. So yeah, it's not using the remote upload at the moment, the way the sensor's working.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Agatha. I have a question to Kathy.
Oh,
so
good.
How do you go from the data you collect in a layperson terms to the 8,000 credit figures? And the second question, how you validate that?
Cheers, thanks.
So taking the Woodland Carbon Code credits as an example, that is, all the modelling is done as part of the Woodland Carbon Code. So we tell them, this is the area, this is the number of trees we're planting, the sort of density of the trees we're planting, this is the soils in that area, this is the ground preparation that we're doing, and they have the models that say, from that woodland that you're creating, this is how much carbon will be sequestered. So in that case, we're not running that calculation to determine those units. That's all done by the scheme. And so that will take these trees, which are expected to grow at this rate, and minus the amount of carbon you'll lose from the soil disruption if you're mounding or whatever. So for those kind of things, we're not running those calculations. That's part of the scheme. But obviously, we're monitoring all the time how our trees are growing relative to those modelled expectations.
So the scheme is validating?
Yes, yeah. And so they'll send a validator out who comes to site and does stocking density assessments, and marks out an area and goes, right, there's supposed to be this many trees in this area and there are this many sort of thing. And so, yeah, so that validation is external at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more? Time for one more down in front here, that's it. There you go.
Cheers, sir. Thanks, Hannah. That was great. And just a question on the peat itself. And when you're cutting the trees, but then are you removing the stumps? And then how long does it take for that land to sort of revert to something that's kind of semi-functioning kind of peatland landscape?
Yeah, I don't know how many stumps we've pulled out. There's kind of like mixed thoughts about it at the moment, about whether they're better just kind of sinking in or whether it's better to pull them out. And, you know, then once all those roots aren't there sucking all the water out of the peat, but, you know, a dead stump wouldn't do that either, you know, does the bog become healthier? Are there then more invertebrates and insects that enjoy living in the wood, which might have kind of more, I don't know, you know, spongy or pocketed bits for them to live in? So actually the peatland code's kind of science rules around that are still changing. And it's interesting, the scheme has sort of new versions every year. So that's that point that Kathy was making. The rules of the scheme might be different in 5 years' time. So it's important that we're kind of saying, okay, well, at the moment it's okay to do that. So we've done that, and this is the results in terms of numbers of invertebrates or amount of carbon.
Okay, so if it's end the Q&A just for now.
Thank you.
Hannah. Again, if everybody could just give a quick round of applause for Hannah. I think one of the things that I'm picking up here is we all have that kind of what gets us out of bed in the morning. And I think to have a passion like Hannah's for something, yes, it's data, but it's a lot more than just data. If it's a feel-good factor for getting up in the morning, I congratulate you, because sometimes I don't want to get out of bed in the morning, I have to say. So we'll move on now, if we can, with Jassel. So Jassel is going to tell us a little bit more about some of the work she's done with the South African decarbonisation programme, but in particular with the techno-economic modelling that she did as part and parcel of that overall package.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Thank you very much, Malcolm, for the kind introduction. I'm Jazz, you can call me Jazz, and I'm going to be talking to you about techno-economic modelling and the decarbonisation of mining. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you will not be too discombobulated by the idea of techno-economic modelling, because you'll discover that it's quite straightforward. Not easy, but straightforward. Okay, so just a really quick summary about me. I did my postgrad at Imperial in theoretical physics, all about modelling physics from first principles. Fracture in nuclear materials was a specific topic, but then I quickly finished that and then cut my teeth on ML, machine learning, at IBM. I spent some time building anti-money laundering models at HSBC, and then I moved on to working in a mining organization where I managed data science teams operating across, exploration, mining, processing, and assets. So that's the full mining value chain, well, close to full. And then most recently, I led the modelling behind Anglo-American's South African decarbonisation programme. And that is the subject of today's talk. So that's the story I'm going to tell. But hopefully you'll go away knowing a lot more about techno-economics in the process. Cool. So let's see this. So this is just a high level what we're going to cover. What is techno-economic modelling? What goes into it? The different scales at which you can apply it. And you'll notice there's going to be a lot of similarity to like what Hannah has been talking about as well, from the carbon credits perspective, and then a little bit of a closing chat about how you can broaden the topic out. So, context. When I was working at Anglo, this is a huge mining organization, right? They have operations worldwide, a lot of them in South Africa. And one of the challenges in South Africa is that they have an energy crisis. Now, there's an energy crisis that we all have. You know, it's all about the energy transition and so on, and like the reduction of fossil fuels. But in South Africa, it's like crisis. And what that means is that there is there's a severely unreliable energy supply. Basically, your power gets shut off periodically, and you have to have diesel backup. And you know, last time I was there, I was in the shower when the power turned off. It went pitch black, and it took about 5 minutes for the diesel generators to come on and turn everything back on. So it's kind of when you're not there, or when you're not from there, it's a scary stuff. But the problem is caused by the fact that originally the whole energy infrastructure was a state-owned, vertically integrated monopoly. What that means is transmission, distribution, generation, all owned and operated by the same state-owned body. And over a number of years, there was a lot of underinvestment in all of that infrastructure, which has basically meant that the plants, the power plants basically don't have enough uptime. They're not getting maintained, so they just shut down. So that's why maintenance is really important. And the symptom of that is what we call load shedding, which is a nice way of saying your power is shut off. So for a big energy intensive business like a mining operation, that's a huge problem from the actual operations perspective. You have to be able to run your mine and run your operation consistently over a period of time. And then when the power gets shut off, or sometimes you get asked to turn your demand down, it can cost you money. So that's an expensive problem for an energy intensive business to have. So it's not, it affects everybody. So in my work, an opportunity kind of arose where in South Africa, the market started to liberalize. That vertically integrated monopoly that I was talking about, transmission, distribution, generation, started to get separated out a little bit, and the doors were opened for external investment. So there's the opportunity for a mining business to start getting its own renewable energy supply. So we ended up with this situation where you've got this overarching goal that any huge business today has, which is to decarbonise, minimise the footprint that a mine might have on the planet, right? So that's one objective. There's a desire for energy security, which is, you know, can we get cheaper, cleaner, more reliable energy to run our operations so that we can keep running? And then economics, which is, well, I already said that, which is it's cheaper than fossil fuel-based energy, is cheaper than diesel, and I'll demonstrate that later. If you can satisfy all of those problems with the same solution, that's like a game changer. And that is exactly what we did. And one of the methods we used was Techno-Economic modeling to actually build the business case. And I'll explain why that is specifically important to this job. Okay, Techno-Economic modeling. What is it? I'll tell you what it's not. It's not just financial modeling. That's for a start. It's the mechanism by which you evaluate the economic performance of an industrial process or a technology or a product. And the distinction from pure financial is that you have technical inputs as well. So you're building up your model from first principles. How does the technology actually work? And how does it perform under real world conditions? And then how much does it cost to build it, finance it, operate it? And then at the very end, can you make any money out of it? Because that's the end objective. Or can you save money, which is what we got to with Anglo. So you've got these two things on the left-hand side here. So what does your technology physically produce? So in the case of renewable energy, it's energy. And how efficiently does it produce it? What does it cost to actually build it and run it over its lifetime? And then at the very end, the test is it financially viable? And that's really important for investing in renewable energy projects, because you need to work out how to size your operation, what technology to pick, where to even put your generator to optimize your financial outcome. So a lot of people will, you might see on the news, there's lots of stuff about, oh, I don't want wind farms next to where I live. Well, one of the challenges there is that the wind doesn't blow in the middle of the city. The wind blows really, really well in certain rural areas, and that's why the business case only works in certain areas, right? So you have to pick where you're going to build based on where the wind blows, or which area has the best solar irradiation, right? And it's not in Scotland, that's for sure. So that's the sort of overarching message there. But importantly, successful technology development, which any thriving business will invest in, requires you to simultaneously optimize your technology, right, and the economics from the beginning. So if you're building something and you're trying to create something new, you can't just make something new. It has to also financially work so that you can actually enter the market. Because if you build something that doesn't hit the right price point, you're not going to be able to sell it to anybody. So fundamentally, that's what this is all about. I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit and just give you a flavor of it. So what goes into a model? Two sides of it: technical inputs and financial inputs, broadly speaking. So this is a very simplified version. The technical inputs are, what's your resource? What's the raw input that your technology converts into a useful output? So in biofuels, that might be feedstock, right? In terms of renewable energy projects, that's going to be your wind speeds, right? Performance, how efficiently does the technology you have turn that resource into the useful output in real world conditions, right? So, calm days, cloudy days, that sort of thing. Then your design, how big or small are you going to size your facility? That really changes the kind of energy profile you might get out of a wind project, for example. And then degradation and reliability. So this is where you start trying to think about, well, I've got to have my operation run for maybe 20, 25 years, and it's going to deteriorate over time. Is it going to be better for me to replace certain assets, or just account for that in the finance, right? Account for the deterioration in the maths. Sometimes it's as simple as, do you pay a couple of kids to squeegee the solar panels to keep them clean and keep them running efficiently? That's that kind of stuff. And on the financial side, so some of those technical inputs map to the financial. It's the upfront cost, right? The big capital expenditure. And the reason this whole discipline is important is because you're usually asking for a lot of money, like millions, multi-million-dollar investments, multi-million-pound investments. So that's the biggest number usually. The OPEX, which is how long does it take to run it over the lifetime. So capital expenditure, operational expenditure. Then you've got market structure. So this is the interesting one in the energy space. The market has rules about how you can get generate income. So in the Wilding example, for example, you've got renewable energy credits, or you've got your carbon credits, and how much you might build in terms of restoring peat bogs correlates with the credits. In terms of renewable energy in the UK, it would be contracts for difference. So those are the kinds of things that might incentivize certain good behaviors or disincentivize bad behaviors. So you have to account for some of those in your models. And then financing, which is when you figured out how much you need, how do you actually get it? And in the South African context, that's really important, because what makes these projects actually viable is that you don't necessarily have to have lots and lots of upfront cash. You can do something called non-recourse project finance. And what that means is the bank will basically lend you a significant proportion of what is needed to actually run the project, and then you obviously pay that over the lifetime of the project, like a mortgage. But it's because, the only reason it works is because solar projects and wind projects are reliable sources of income, so to speak. You know that the wind is going to keep blowing over the years, right? And you know that the sun is pretty much going to keep shining. The degree to which you can confidently model that is what helps you back up your business case and get your funding from the banks. But that's one of the interesting features of renewable energy projects. There are structures, there are financial instruments available to make these easy to invest in. And that is what we used in my work at Anglo. So this looks like the same slide, but it's different. This is everything in terms of energy projects, right? So your resource is going to be your irradiance. You have technical advisors who will go and like stick instruments in the ground and measure the wind speeds or measure the irradiance in certain areas, your terrain. Your performance is going to be your energy yield, right? Or and your capacity factor. So for a solar project, like your average solar farm will have a capacity factor of between something like 10 and 30%. It's really not that efficient. A great wind project might have about 45%, and gas is far, far more efficient, and nuclear is actually a lot more efficient as well. So those things come in to the equation. Those things mean that you need to have a much, much cheaper operation, cheaper source of energy, cheaper everything else in order for it to be just as efficient or just as financially viable. So you're doing all of these things. You've got all these levers that you're pulling to try and improve the financial viability of your work. And maybe 10, 20 years ago, the cost of solar panels was just too high for it to be worth investing in. And as the technology has improved, the cost of building those has gone down, and that's what makes them economically viable now, just because it's the learning rate or the learning curve. So I've talked about design, and then you've got your degradation and reliability. So batteries, for example, the more you use them, the more they degrade, just like your phone battery. So how do you account for that? What's the number you apply to that in your model to account for how much less it's going to be, how much the capacity will reduce by year on year? And then you've got your financial, which I've roughly gone into, but I'm gonna go ahead. Okay, so now I'm just going to talk about how all of that applies in the work that we did at Anglo. So the story is we basically built a renewable energy business, joined forces with a company called EDF Renewables, which is the renewables arm of EDF, and built a pipeline of renewable energy projects. And the question is, how do you build a pipeline of renewable energy projects that you're going to use to decarbonize your mine. You need to work out how much energy you need, what the profile is going to be, and whether it's going to meet your demand optimally. So this is almost like an energy grid problem in microcosm. You've got your inputs of this like portfolio scale model, which is all of your operations, what's their demand, how much do they need on a daily, hourly basis, what's your potential supply, what are all these projects you've got? You've got like, wind projects have totally different profiles from solar projects. They have different profiles from other wind projects, right? Some wind projects have mostly nighttime wind. Some wind projects have mostly daytime wind. How do you match up all of those profiles with what is needed by your operation? It's the equivalent of like what the energy grid does. And then you've got your grid constraints that you've got to account for. So if you imagine you've got all of these operations all over South Africa, and then you've got all of these projects all over South Africa, but some of the cables that connect one area to another, they're really thin, right? So they're not going to be able to transmit as much energy from one place to another. So you've got to account for those constraints. So this is, maybe some of you might see where I'm going with this. This is an optimization problem. So at the portfolio scale, at the huge scale, the techno-economic analysis is like a huge optimization problem. How do I balance exactly how much renewable energy I need? What kind of technology mix do I need? Is it 50% solar? Is it 10% solar? Is it 5% battery? Right? How much do I need? Where do I need it? When should I build it? And what's my outcome going to be at the end? You know, how much of a dent am I going to make in the carbon footprint of this organization once I've done it? And so that's the kind of modeling framework at the large scale that we did. So it's a lot more. It's a much sort of coarser view. It's not as detailed, but it gives you a good idea of like the strategic direction in which you want to take. It gives you an idea of, okay, roughly I'm going to need to build this much at this point, so I really need to start yesterday. You know, I need to, you know, start investing in these types of projects, or I need to start searching for more wind projects because they take a lot longer to build. So that gives you your view of like how you would strategize over 5 or 10 years to achieve a huge sort of impact on your organization. So your outputs of these portfolio level models is what you should build, how much you should build, the mix, when you should build it, and where, right? So this is like the ultimate answer to the ultimate question there. So once you've done that, once you've got your big picture view, then you can start getting more detailed. And that's where the detailed techno-economics comes in. Oh, there we go. Oh yeah, this is the right slide. I've condensed it down into like a single number just to give you a comparison, right? When you get to detailed levels of like projects and you're looking at an individual project, let's say you're looking at a 100 megawatt wind project somewhere in like, I don't know, in the northwest of Scotland maybe. What you want to work out at the very minimum is it viable from a cost perspective? So the reason I've put this slide up is that it condenses down this whole idea of techno-economics for energy into just one measure, which is called the levelized cost of energy, or the levelized cost of electricity. It's the way in which we, like practitioners of like techno-economics and renewables, would quickly try and compare how two different projects, how viable they are. So what you're doing is you're saying the numerator of that equation is your total life cycle costs. What that means is, what's your upfront cost, your CapEx? What's your operational expenditure, your OpEx? That's at the top. And then at the bottom, it's how much energy can you output over the entire lifetime of the project, right? So it's a lot of megawatt hours, let's put it that way. So you can immediately see from here that the higher your capital costs, right, the higher the top of your fraction there, the higher your levelized cost of energy. But if your energy yield is huge, it doesn't make a difference, does it? Or if your operational cost is also huge, but you don't pay for fuel, that's also really nice and easy. So one of the reasons that gas over there is so expensive is because you're paying for fuel. But there's no fuel for solar and wind. It's free. The earth provides. So that's an immediate way of seeing whether you're going to make or save money. So one of the bits of maths you would do is in a business is to say, okay, if I'm going to displace however many megawatts of power, right, 2 to 3 gigawatts of power is what I'm aiming for, with wind and solar energy, which is cheaper, how much money am I saving? And the maths checks out to nearly like $1 billion US over the lifetime of the project. That's the scale of what you're saving financially, and that's what incentivizes people to decarbonize. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense, but hopefully that also shows in a really simplified form how the maths of these different projects and these different technologies comes together. And one of the important factors is these numbers were not the same 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The capex required to build onshore wind was huge. It was maybe 2 or 3 times the amount it is today. And because the technology has evolved, it's gotten better, it's cheaper to produce, and that's the learning curve that I was talking about. The more you build it, for every additional unit you build, the cost of building it goes down because you learn more about how to do it efficiently. That's part of the whole technology development process. Cool. I'm going to close with just a bit of an idea of like the broader applications, right? I put this together really quickly, so if you ask me detailed questions about biofuels, I will not be able to answer them. But broadly speaking, right, when you're talking about biofuel technology, which is another sort of clean energy innovation, what you're trying to work out is the economics of taking feedstock and turning it into a fuel. Like, is your process efficient enough to do that in a competitive way? Small modular reactors, which is like baby nuclear reactors, right? What you're trying to do is work out the economics of manufacturing lots and lots of these at scale and comparing them to just a huge, time-intensive, capital-intensive project, right? The small and sprightly can kind of win over here. The other one is that a lot of mining businesses are looking at is green steel or steel businesses. So how can you convert your steel from being essentially grey or not green in the reduction process? So taking iron ore and removing the oxygen, which is the reduction process. Can you use hydrogen-based power to do that? And then the last one is direct air capture, which actually ties in nicely with Hannah's talk, which is essentially sucking like carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and then storing it in the ground. How do you build a business case for that? It's basically a big vacuum cleaner, right? So like, how do you build the business case for that? And if you want to look at a good example of it, there's a project called Orca in Iceland, which literally does this. Iceland's completely like carbon neutral, so they don't need to do this. But what they do is they sell the carbon credits to other energy-intensive industries, and that's their business model. So it's all about how can you efficiently do this, minimize your costs, and actually sell the output. And that is broadly how techno-economics can be used to help, essentially the energy transition.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jassel. So once again, audience questions. And similarly online, audience questions.
Just interested to know how much and how far that's been taken forward on the ground.
So just this year, so these projects take a while to actually get off the ground, but just this year, the whole project as a whole got 520 megawatts up and running. I think actually 390 of the 520. It's all there, but there's actually like power coming from 390 megawatts out of the whole project, which is kind of huge. And those were projects that started, there's 2 wind projects and 1 solar project. I don't remember exactly where, but yeah, a solar would take about 18 months from the minute that you get your funding, right, to get it to operation. A wind project can take 2 to 2.5 years. So yeah, some of you might have seen the big sort of yellow things down in Leith. That's offshore wind and development. Yeah.
I think you did touch on this, but one of the big challenges of renewable coming in is grid and connectivity. Thinking in Scotland in particular, where we're now generating in places we used to have very little activity going on at all, but we're now producing vast amounts of power from all these new tidals, wind, etc. Yeah. And now we're getting it back in. And the limitation now is not building the sites, it's building the connectivity. How do you account for those in your modelling?
So I can tell you a bit about the UK, because the UK has different rules on how the grid kind of makes itself known in the finances. It's all about the upfront investment costs, from what I recall. But there was a recent debate about like zonal pricing for the energy grid, and I think it was decided not to do that. And that's one of the issues, I think. I think it's a market issue, because there is no market incentive to make anyone build anywhere other than Scotland for wind projects. And then you've got this huge bottleneck, right, somewhere in the border, meaning that you can't get all of that energy supply down to most of the demand centres, which are in England. So it's about creating the right incentives. They don't necessarily exist in England. In South Africa, one of the constraints is literally like the same grid access. So at that point, there's no point for a company like Anglo, there's no point to build if you can't get the energy and if you can't get on the queue for grid access. But most of the time what you would do is you would account for grid fees, right? Grid access fees in your financial models, in the operational aspect of your models. That's an ongoing fee. And one of the challenges can be predicting what that's going to be in 10 years' time, because it could change. And so that's where you have to stress test your model and do all of this scenario modeling to see, well, you know, optimistically, how much am I going to get out of this? Conservatively, what am I going to get out of this? And if it still holds up in these different scenarios, then you've got a working model. But there is a bit of element of uncertainty that you try to minimize there. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah.
Hiya. Was it an in-house optimization model build? And if so, what were some of the challenges of the optimization itself?
Oh God. Well, yeah, good question. So one of the tools that the tool that we used was Plexos, which is we kind of used two, Plexos and Pipesa, and that's a commercial energy modeling tool. And one of the challenges there is when you have a really complicated topology, like the optimization, the time to actually get the optimization done to get it to converge is like really, really long. So you have to come up with a couple of ways to try and simplify the problem. Off the top of my head, I'm not going to be able to remember the details, but that's where knowing that it was a strategic problem that you were solving helped, because you could look at it in a little bit of a blurry way because you're looking at the overarching problem. But when you get into the weeds, you want to absolutely solve that with a high degree of confidence. So I think that was where the trade-off came in. It were kind of willing to accommodate a slightly sort of almost like blurry model, just because it was so high level.
So you talked a little bit about how you've got a demand profile and you're trying to match the solar and wind profiles against that. In mining, is there an opportunity to change the demand profile in a way, or does it not really the business last for that?
Yeah, so that's kind of something that they already do in response to load shedding. So it's a mechanism called curtailment. So sometimes the energy grid will ask these businesses to turn down their demand, turn down their operation, and there might be some sort of reciprocal sort of arrangement there. So in principle, it is possible, but ideally, if you want to run an efficient business, you want to be doing your work as often as you possibly can, not turning down your operation. There might be some room in certain processes, like if you've managed to if you've got a backlog in certain areas, if there's delays in certain areas, you can turn certain things off, in principle, yeah. But that kind of flexibility, that's I think you're talking about demand side flexibility, which I don't know exactly the answer. I know that it's probably more possible in the sort of consumer, sort of individual sort of world. I'm not sure how much flexibility there is in an operation, or how much there should be, because it's about making sure your business can still operate. So, yeah.
So thank you everyone once again. A big thank you to Jassel. I for one will go home and discuss TEM with my daughter with a little more enthusiasm than I might have done on Sunday of this week, but we'll see. So once again, thank you to both of our speakers. Thank you to everybody that's been here tonight and those that joined us online. In our usual fashion, at the end of our session, we have our kind of open mic. Anybody here that wants to make a shout out about something that's going on in their life? Neville, I thought you might be number one. Grab 30 seconds or so to tell us a little bit about what you're looking for, what you're doing, and what's coming up if you can.
I always seem to do this. Hi, I'm Neville. I'm from the Edinburgh Local Group of the Royal Statistical Society. I'm just going to mention about 2 events that we're running later in the year, one in September and one in November. The one in September is an event that we call Jobs of the Unknown, and we're looking for people to come along and be mystery guests, to be quizzed by a group of aspiring data analysts, along with other various people in a sort of... It happens in this very room, and you can influence the next generation of... Your data that you play with, the better. We want to keep them guessing as much as they can. So that's in September, and if you want to find out a little more detail, I'll be in the foyer afterwards. In November, we're running our final event of the year, and we're setting it up as a bit of experiment, a live debate as to whether AI will replace statisticians. So if you want to come along and be part of that debate, being maybe one side of the argument or the other, or just come along to see who wins or loses, I've got some information again. Both of those events, you want to come chat to me afterwards, I can give you some information, no obligation to take part, you're just curious to find out more. I hope to chat to some of you later. Thank you very much.
Cheers, thanks. Is there anybody else there that would like to chip in a quick 30 seconds as to things that are coming up in their lives that might be of interest? In which case then, if there's not, can I just say, if you've enjoyed this evening, check out our next list of events. Steve has a list coming up for us just now. There will be more events later up in the year. These are the imminent ones, if you like, but do check out the website as well, because there's details of everything that is in the themes that are coming up, and you will know that every month there will be an event that's going to be matched up to these. Whether you've enjoyed this evening or not, we would love feedback. It's easy for us to sit here and go, that went really well. What we don't know is what the 70 people in the audience and people online are actually thinking. So please, if you can, scan this QR code, send us feedback. It really does work, and Steve and I will pay particular attention to this. and we'll see how it goes. And that, in essence, gentlemen and ladies, is a wrap. Thank you once again to Hannah and to Jassel, and thank you to everybody that was here this evening.